Here to talk about your brand, your board, your future. And today's talk is really about what it means to have a brand and how we think about ourselves as brands, as often we think of companies as brands, but how we need to start thinking about ourselves as brands, and need our own boards. And that's how we create our futures. So that's the summary. A little bit about me. I am Manju Mude. I am just waiting for the slides to advance. There you go. So I am a CISO currently. I work at a bank called Opportune, a financial, actually it's a fintech, and it's a pretty cool place to be. Really, really awesome. It serves underserved populations and financially disadvantaged populations. And so it's a very mission-driven organization, and I really enjoy it. My career, I've been at places like Apple, Splunk, also been with the government and other banks, as well as Yahoo and Verizon throughout my career. So it's been a fun journey, and I'm a huge advocate for boosting diversity in both tech and in security. And definitely a very big fan of Day of Security. So thank you for having me. I've been a fan since day one. Some of the products that you've heard of that you use every day, like iTunes, iMessage, Yahoo, those types of products, I've worked on them as well and helping secure those throughout my career. Little unique tidbit about me. I do have a bachelor's in art and a master's in information systems, and I've been in security for over 20 something years. So people ask me, oh, that's really unique. There's an assumption that you have to be in security or start your career in cyber or start your career in tech. And I share that because I want to show that there's ways to get into technology and ways to get into security without necessarily having a formal degree in it and making your way to it. So we need right brain, left brain, and all sorts of creative ideas in cybersecurity. I've lived in a bunch of different places. Right now, I'm based in Austin, Texas. I moved here a couple years ago, but around the start of the pandemic. I was living in the Bay Area for a number of years. I also lived in New England, New York, India, and a couple of other places. So that's a bit about me. You can read about a little bit about what I like and what I don't like. And down there, there's my Twitter and my LinkedIn if you need to contact me. So we can dive right into our presentation. Thank you. So you often think of brands, and you might think of these brands. You've probably heard of these brands, and you've seen them in your day-to-day world. And so these kinds of brands are something that we've often synonymized with, oh, I know what that is, or I know right off the top of my head. But we don't think about brands like ourselves, right? These are iconic brands like Apple or Nike, and they sell products, and they represent certain emotions. So when we think of brands, we don't just think of the product, we also think of the emotions that product carries. And while most people think of businesses, they should be thinking as individuals also as brands. The best brands are usually authentic, unique, and trustworthy. They build a strong reputation that can help you grow personally and professionally as well. And that's what we'll talk about. So we often confuse our reputation as our personal brand. Next slide. But our reputation is not our brand. And it's easy to confuse those. Everyone has a reputation. Everybody in any industry, anywhere, has a reputation. Your first impressions, the relationships you make, who you manage, who you interact with, your peers, how you communicate, that's your reputation. That's how others see you. But your personal brand is intentional. It's something you build. And so we're going to talk about how you build that personal brand and how you want people to think of you and how you want people to see you. So it really encapsulates who you are and how you can differentiate yourself from others. A brand is both what you stand for as well as what you do. Next slide. When we think of your brand, we think, oh, I have to go and get my brand somewhere. I have to construct my brand. But you actually have the power to define your brand, regardless of what you think your reputation is or is not. So there is a piece of intentionality behind it. And the biggest thing is you really have to align your intentions with your actions. So we all go into career decisions, we all go into personal decisions with intentions, but sometimes our actions or don't parallel that. And so that alignment or that development of brand is actually what gets you to the brand that you want, the alignment between intention and action. And changing your decisions, changing your behaviors, and how your behaviors influence how others people see you and how others connect with you emotionally as well as intellectually. So the ways that you can define your brand is a few steps. I made it really simple. There's lots of tips and techniques out there about defining your brand. Um, the slides it seem like they're cut off a little bit at the bottom, but I don't know. So the brand the steps to aligning your brand is really simple. You can go from 1 to 100, or I tried to make it simple for this presentation, and it's really about figuring out who you are and what drives you. This presentation, there's different ways that you can think about a brand. People think about brands nowadays also as their personal brand in terms of social media, right? And that's definitely an avenue or a vector to communicate your brand, but it is not the brand. The brand is actually you as a human being and your whole self and what you want people to think of you. The way you communicate your brand is through media, social media, and other ways. And of course, actions and intentions. So figuring out what drives you and how you want to communicate that is definitely a piece of it. And you really have to align your values to your organization goals. Like I said, there's some brand ideas that really talk about social media. This is not that talk. This is really about growing in your career and defining your brand. And for those of you that are already in organizations or are going to go to a different organization, it's really about aligning your values with the organization goals. And I'll go into that in a separate slide. Mapping your stakeholders and making yourself visible. So when we think about figuring out what drives you, you really have to start with some questions. Really, what motivates you? What skills are you curious about? What energizes you? What do you admire? Who do you admire? And where do you feel like you've contributed to the world, right? So those are the things that you have to figure out. No one else can answer those questions. No CISSP manual, CISM, or any other certification you get are going to answer those questions. That's really about you and your whole self. And taking all of those questions into account and doing this exercise and mapping is one of the really effective ways to figure out what you want your brand to be as you journey through your career. And I will say there's people who are earlier in their career here and there's people who are later in their career here. This is for everybody. So even though we think we have a brand or we think we have a reputation, it's always good to step back and take a check and see if your brand has deviated from your original intention, and go through this exercise. Step 2 is about aligning your values to the organization goals. I want to be very careful about this one because it doesn't mean changing your values. It doesn't mean that you now have to change who you are or change what you believe in. It's number one, figuring out if your values aligns to the organizational values and figure out where they align. And if the organizational values are so far from your personal values, you might want to question why you're there and make some different decisions as you move forward in your career. There is an exercise that goes along with it, which is selecting a keyword or attribute to help you define your brand. Often it's 1 or 2 words, things like leader, innovator, builder, creative. Those are all things that you can define your brand through. And if you pick 1 or 2, you can really focus on what you want your brand to be. And you can do this through increments as well. That means what makes sense for you over the next 24 months might change and after that. So you can do this incrementally. Step 3 is about mapping your stakeholders. We all have folks that we admire in the industry. We have folks that we admire in our organization, our peers. There's many here at Dave Security that I admire. And we have to there's a way to take all of that and say, let me see how those influencers in my organization are outside and connect with them, both formally and informally. You can learn about their interests, their challenges, or things that they're trying to solve, and other ways to get to know them. It often feels like OSINT work, actually. So defining your audience is a piece of it, as well as when you map your stakeholders. Figure out who you want that attention from, or who is most valuable to you in your brand and in your personal journey. And that is who you'll want to model yourself after, or the values and the alignment of those brands, the challenges that they face, the missions that they have. Those are things that you can also look into and reflect yourself. And everybody doesn't necessarily have to be a complete unicorn. Everybody doesn't necessarily have to be not like no words like the other. There's many of us have a lot in common, and that's okay. So it's okay if your personal brand or your personal influencers are very similar to many others, or your friends or other peers in your network. It's really important to define your niche when you're thinking about your target audience for your stakeholders as well. So step 4, make yourself visible. A brand can't succeed if no one is aware of it. Reach out to people fearlessly. And I think that that's one of the key takeaway messages here, is reaching out to the people that you want to learn from, or you want help from, as also people you want to grow into as you go through your career. I think that that's often where people in early career or mid-career, I've seen that's where they have a lot of struggles. And that's why I said fearlessly, because it can feel awkward at first, but don't feel afraid to ask for help. You can ask your contacts or your peers for help, and they can help you make introductions. So it feels kind of weird, but I can tell you that any of those folks that are in incident response roles or blue team roles, when you're in the middle of an incident, or you're in the middle of a key decision that's impacting the organization or an investigation, that fear goes out the window. You have no choice but to contact people, and you have no choice but to map out solutions. So apply some of those principles that you take to be fearless when you're in the middle of your work, when you roll up your sleeves and you're in the middle of an incident. Apply those to yourself and your career about being fearless. So that's a bit of a tidbit I have. And then when you are reaching out to people, you have to ask advice, and you have to seek expertise. And you should also be addressing ways that you can help them. It's not always about what they can give you. There's ways that you can help them. And as you go through this journey and you think about the peers, or the people that you want to be influencing you, or the people that are affecting your brand, or you want to know about your brand, you have to think about it as visibility. Are you visible? Do you have anything to give them? Do they have anything to give you? And it's a bit of a combination of both. So think about all the experiences you've had, contacts you've had, things that you can bring to them as well. It's not just a one-way street. And you must articulate what you stand for and how it makes a difference to the organization, or how it makes a difference to the industry. If you're trying to make these contacts within your organization, you have to be able to courageously state exactly what you do and how it's impacting the company, and how it's making your organization or your company or your team better. And that's also at the industry level, as you learn from peers. And if there are folks that you admire in the industry, you definitely want to frame it as things that you're contributing to the industry, or would like to contribute to make a difference and make a change. I think things like diversity, things like bringing more women into security, as well as very topic specific things like changing the world of vulnerability management, or changing the world of network ops. Those things, while we have those as some of our ultimate goals, you really have to be a little bit tactical on how you want to impact that, and how you do impact that in your day-to-day. So I just pulled this slide so it gives you a complete vision of everything that encompasses your brand identity. It's your authenticity, it's your vision, personality, value, your differentiation, and your commitment. I think the biggest thing for me I want to highlight also is your authenticity. All of these things play into it equally, but your authenticity is something you should never lose. While you're going on this journey, it's really easy to be influenced by people you think are more impactful within your organization or in the industry, but you are who you are, and you should stay authentic to who you are. We're all striving to grow and be better and do more, and that's not unique to you, and so you should not be afraid of that. And so you should stay authentic to who you are, and that's a key piece of going on this journey. So next, I'm going to talk about boards, building your board. I made this slide intentionally gray on purpose. So, so as you're building your board, if you, what do you think of when you think of boards, right? Do you think of these people on the left side? And I have a little comment in there about where's the diversity. We need to change this. So a little bit about boards and how they're structured. Here's what a typical company structure is like, and whether a board of directors sits. Of course, there's an audit committee and all these other things. There's many resources out there to help you learn about boards and how they're structured. So I don't want to give you the formal training on what is a board, but we'll go into it just a little bit. So what makes up a board at a company is organizations usually have anywhere between 3 to 31 directors. The board of directors are usually responsible for the stakeholders, the vision, the trajectory, the financial growth, the profitability. They're also responsible for things like crisis. And maybe some of you have even interacted or prepared materials for your leadership in a board situation, and maybe some of you presented to the board as well. But either way, that ability to convey chaos, which security often has, into a way that translates to business is a key part of the journey of climbing in your profession. And some of that information makes it all the way up to the board. And you have to learn how to do that effectively, and tie all of that together. So you really have to ask yourself, who's on your board? Who is it that inspires you, that you interact with frequently? Who holds you accountable? You know, in a typical board, there's a CFO contributes, and there's a board of directors often who are ex-CFOs or ex-CEOs. And so if you think about that model and you apply that to yourself, we as individuals should form our own board of directors. We as individuals should form our own brands. And so taking those principles of boards and brands and applying it to ourselves in the way that we think about ourselves. Who do you interact with frequently? Who holds you accountable and wants to see you grow? Those are the same principles, if you apply it to the board, that you can apply to your personal life. There's an exercise here about making a list of people on your board. Who are your advocates? Who are your allies? Who are your growth champions? And when you think about your assets, you know, typically we think about assets as being monetary or financial, but there's a piece of it. Of course, we all have a bit of financial stability and growth that we want, but there's also an asset that you have, which probably is a top asset for everyone: happiness and joy, or peace, or some iteration of that. So when you're thinking about your board, those are the assets they're trying to protect. Those are the assets they're trying to grow. So having those sample assets, those values that are important to you, what makes up your whole self, and some of that is achieved through your earlier brand exercise as well. So that I just wanted to wrap it up here since we're short on time, but taking all of those messages around taking your brand, taking your board, and then moving that to your corporate self. You know, if you think about yourself as an entity or a corporation, you yourself, you'll start thinking about the decisions you make differently. And while you're thinking about building your board and you're thinking about building your brand, you'll also want to be very careful and remove detractors. So people who are not necessarily adding to your brand, and knowing when it's okay to shift away from that. and also refreshing your brand periodically, refreshing your board of directors periodically. Boards change all the time. Board members change all the time. And authenticity matters, right? So as you're going through this journey, as you change, as you grow as a person, your board might need to change. That means the people that you hold as your key advisors earlier in your journey may not make sense today. And you can reinvent yourself, right? So there's stories about how companies roll out products that are so different from a product that you know. And as an example, it could be like, we all think about brands like, let's say, toothpaste, right? Colgate. If Colgate came out with a food product, it would be very challenging to us, right? So knowing how to reinvent your brand and when to reinvent your brand is a key piece of your brand journey. So that's about it. I just wanted to sum it up with letting you know that here's your brand opportunity, and to let you know that your brand and your board is actually yourself, your whole self. So thank you for attending my talk.